Hi Afia, how are you doing? Okay, so I actually have, yeah, today I'm a bit unwell, so I'm not sure how long this session might be, but let's see how it goes. But tell me, where did you have a doubt? And actually, Afia, today I have some slides on the Jacquard's index as well, so we could maybe briefly cover those concepts. But yeah, tell me about your current doubt. Is it based on genetic implications of XC2? Okay. Um, yeah. So, what exactly is your doubt in this? Is there anything particular in this part, or just generally? Uh, so you could understand, or you couldn't understand? Could not understand. Okay, cool. So let's wait till maybe we get to the part of XC2 conservation, and then maybe let's discuss more. We can maybe take some examples of you know current studies that have been done, and maybe we could take some examples of I think it's the lectures mostly covered with regard to plants, but we could cover something with regard to animals as well. So yeah, we can discuss shortly. Right. Genetic correlation pleiotropy usually is dependent on plant systems. So, genetic variation is not selected for in XC2 conservation because there are no such factors, or that natural selection doesn't act on anything. So, what is basically pleiotropy? It's a single gene that affects two or more characters. So, I'm not really sure in what context this is coming in the lecture. Is it with regard to fitness? Let me look it up. Some gene may increase cryopreservation stability but decrease the number of seeds produced, and selection of plants producing seeds is better than. Oh, okay. Okay, so out here it's written in terms of genetic correlations or pleiotropy. For example, some genes may increase. Okay, so it's basically when a single gene is responsible for two different factors. So a single gene does not just control one thing, but it controls multiple factors that might lead to the fitness of an organism. So now in terms of cryopreservation, which is a form of XC2 conservation, when seeds are put in a gene bank, the seeds that survive are the ones that have the ability to preserve under these cold conditions, right? But if the gene that is responsible for survival at low temperatures is also a factor that results in a low number of seeds, that becomes a problem, right? Why does that become a problem? Because so the seeds, when they're put into a seed bank, the seeds that survive the cold temperature are the ones that can be sown again, but those seeds that are sown again are the ones that produce low number of seeds, right? So it doesn't serve the purpose of cryopreservation. Does this make sense? It's the same gene that affects two different fitness parameters, and in this case it is negatively correlated with each other. Cool. All right. So hi everyone. I'm Chiti, one of your course TAs for this course in Wildlife Ecology. We are well into week 8, and today we'll be discussing few factors on extinctions and factors that are detrimental for the survival of different organisms. And we will also be covering different conservation type measures, which includes in situ conservation and ex situ conservation, right? So just a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not my throat is a bit gone, so I'll be talking in a low volume, and please excuse me coughing or anything if I do happen to be doing so, and please feel free to add to the conversations, because hopefully you all will do more discussion today than otherwise. All right, so let's start with our first question. Right, so tell me, what are the factors that can contribute towards extinction? You can use the chat box, feel free to unmute and discuss. So you can just put in some points, don't worry about it being right or wrong. What do you think, considering today's world, what do you think are the factors that are responsible for extinction? Anything, can be plant or animal extinction. Okay, habitat loss. Diseases, yeah. Pollution, yeah. Overuse of one species. Okay, Afia or anyone else, would you like to put in some examples? When we mean by overuse, what are some examples of overuse that you, okay, illegal animal trade, yeah, poaching, okay, right. So all of these factors are responsible for extinction. Pet trade is something that is very common and very rampant, where you have where you have certain species on the earth going absolutely extinct because they've been hunted for, and they might be hunted for various different reasons, some ancient medicine, or for their byproducts to be used to manufacture certain things or to create certain things, right? You can think of like so many examples where animal body parts are being harvested to create different kinds of clothing items or souvenirs, etc. Mementos. Okay, so Rajshri says invasive species. So how does invasive species contribute to extinction? Rajshri, any idea? they take right. So basically, how do invasive species function? They take over the natural habitat of native species, and then the native species in that area don't have any habitat or resources to survive, and since the invasive species are rapidly proliferating, the native species tend to lose out, right? So I think there are a couple of examples of invasive species, especially red algae has been affecting blue algae. Oh, I'm not sure of this example. Is it in the lecture? Or if not, I'd be happy to. If you have any, so if you have any resources on that, please feel free to share that. It seems to be an interesting read. But I think there have been a lot of. You have read an article. Okay, sure. Please feel free to share that article if you find it. And another thing about invasive species is, I think there were some cats that were introduced in these island systems, and a lot of I think there was another top predator. I think it was a snake introduced into an island system, and which led to the loss of a lot of native fauna. So yes. What are the other factors? So easy acronym to take note of, to remember factors involved in species loss and that may contribute towards extinction can be seen in this acronym as HIPPO, which basically covers habitat loss, invasive species, pollution. What else? What are the other two factors? One is, this is there in the lecture. What is the other, the second last P and the last O stand for? So basically you have overpopulation and overharvesting, right? Yeah. So correct, Nupur and Afia. So population increase of humans puts a lot of pressure on resources that are present in our natural world, and that results in loss of a lot of biodiversity. And also overharvesting, which is I think we already covered this, which is the rampant use of a single species of whatever it could be, produce, plants or animals. This may result in extinction of the particular species, right? So we are often subjected, so our agricultural society is such that agricultural system is such that it needs to produce enough food to sustain all the people, right? And very often most of the agricultural regimes to generate a particular food crop is monoculture. And what is monoculture? Any idea what is monoculture? Yeah, so you grow one crop continuously in a particular area, and this leads to nutrient depletion and nothing else can grow in that area, and the land becomes barren. So first of all, the areas are cleared so that agricultural fields can come, and then when monoculture is followed, a lot of nutrients are not replenished to the soil, and that's why it can result in loss of general vegetation in that area. Alright, so next I'm going to bring upon something that is really interesting, which is basically how sensitive are animals to human activities, right? So this is basically taken from a paper in a journal known as Ecography. I can send a link of this out here. Take a minute to look at this graph and try and explain what is this graph actually trying to show. So it's okay if you are not sure of what it exactly means, but the graphs are quite clear. So tell me, what do you think is actually shown in the graph? What is it actually trying to tell us? Have you heard of these terms before? Urban avoiders, urban adapters, and urban exploiters? No, okay. So, is there any sense that can be made from this graph given alongside? So, the lines in blue actually can represent the activity of, let's say, for example, these three species of birds, and the green green part also tells us our activity patterns of these particular birds. So what do you think is basically shown here? So what does the name, it's okay, light pollution and sound pollution have been affecting bird behavior. Okay, so when I say the effect of urbanization on birds, yes, that is correct. This is an effect of urbanization on birds, and you have species that can respond in different ways to urbanization, right? So basically, you have birds that completely are averse to urbanization. There are some species that adapt to urbanization, and then there are some that exploit urbanization, right? So, like for example, this is not an example from India. Where is this from? I think this is a data set that has been taken from Australia, right? And this is using eBird data sets. So basically what they try and show in this particular graph is responses to urbanization, right? So they have three species distributions in response to nighttime lights based on eBird data, demonstrating an example species for each of these distributions. The x-axis, the y-axis represents the density of observations that occur along the urbanization level. That is, higher on the x-axis, higher is the density, and the x-axis actually shows response to nighttime lights, right? So there are certain species like this Wonga pigeon that are completely averse to urban situations, right? And then you have the urban adapters, which basically are birds that are accustomed to urban habitats, but they are not really fully residing there all the time. They come sometimes when their activity peaks when the nightlight activity decreases, and then there are some species of birds that just peak when the nightlight activity or the urbanization activity increases, right? And that is seen in the last bird. And can you give me some examples of birds that are urban exploiters which you see around you? Can you think of a species that you see around you that you only see in cities and not in the forest? House crow, yeah, another one. House crow sometimes you find also in the forest. House sparrow, yeah, that's an interesting example. House sparrows you find in urban and rural gradients, but you don't find it really in the forest. Black kites, yeah, black kites also you don't really find in any forested areas. They are mostly found in human settlement areas. Now, what is another example? I'm looking for one more example that is really found everywhere, but not in the forest. Miners, sure. Miners are also urban birds. Though you might find miners in forested areas. Yes, pigeons, right? So you are highly unlikely to see a rock pigeon anywhere in a forest because it's so accustomed to being in the city. Alright, so that should give you an idea of urban adapters and urban avoiders. Alright, so now according to the theory of island biogeography, we covered this in detail in the previous lecture. The species richness is dependent on the area of an island, the species type occupying the island, both A and B, or none of the above. Okay, ऊपर से C. Actually, so C. I'm going to just talk a little less. You guys can all put in your answers. I think we can get answers from 2 more people. Okay, so indeed you both are correct, and the correct answer is C. It depends on the area of an island and the species type occupying the island, right? Both these factors. Okay, so keeping in mind this theory of island biogeography itself, which of the following species has the highest rate of extinction? I'm not going to read out the options, but yeah, do read it and tell me which would be the most appropriate option. options in. Um, Rajashri and Afia say D, Nupur says C. So the correct answer actually is D, species D, with a population size of 60 found on one island. Uh, um, Rajashri and Afia, could you tell Nupur why D is a more appropriate answer than C? Why did you choose D over C? Right, but even if we have number of individuals, well, species C has 100 individuals, which is more than species D. Right. So, what happens if they are spread over different geographical masses? What, how are species found on only one island more vulnerable? Why are they more vulnerable than the other species that is found on 4 different islands? Any guesses? Right. So basically, it all boils down to the fact of extinction, and if there is some particular catastrophe that strikes on that one island, it results in the loss of all the individuals on that island, right? So there is going to be no more individuals of that species left. Correct. Okay, so discuss and list out what are the inherent factors that might make a species more susceptible to extinction. So we have actually discussed this in like various different parts. Lower geographical range, yes. Are selected species, okay. Yeah. Inbreeding, yeah, sure. So all these factors drive all point to a species not being present in large numbers, right? So if they have a small distribution range, then anyway the number of individuals that the distribution range can support is much lesser. It might be because completely they are completely dependent upon a particular habitat. They are as Afia mentioned, they are endemic species, or Archie mentioned they are endemic species, they are specialist species, and they need to be in a particular habitat configuration only. If there are certain changes to that particular habitat configuration, it results in making a species more susceptible to extinction. Right. Rajshri, would you like to explain what are our selected species? Actually, that might. Yeah. Tell me what are our selected species and what are the other selected species called, and which of the two are more prone to extinction? High mortality and high reproductivity. Right. So these are our selected species. Can you give me an example of an R selected species? Bacteria. Okay. So now what are the other type of species? Key selective species. Right. And so what are key selectives? Okay, human beings. Can you give me what are the factors that allow a species to be defined as key selected species? Sorry, I'll just be back. 1 minute. Sorry about that. uh, Human beings are key selective species. They have a high probability of survival, correct? They have low birth rate, fewer offspring, parental care, okay? Yes. Alright, so now you know the differences between R selected species and K selected species. Keeping these two in mind, which of the two do you feel are more susceptible to extinction? Let's not talk about humans. Can you give me another example rather than humans? Because humans are an anomaly to this because of, let's say, medical facilities. People survive till they are 120, they are able to reproduce at whatever age. Okay, so you are saying, okay, can you give me an example of another R selected, K selected species apart from humans? Elephant, correct. Tigers, yes. And Whooper, yes, you are correct. K selected species are more prone to extinction than R selected species. Um, Rajshri, does this make any sense? Are you sure? So if you have a species that takes a lot of time to reproduce and also has a very long generation time, fewer offsprings, etc., etc., they are more susceptible to extinction, right? So if you imagine an elephant versus a, I don't know, squirrel or something like that, a small, or a lizard, these small organisms that lay hundreds of eggs, and as opposed to an elephant that reproduces maybe like once in every couple of years, right? The extinction probability of a larger animal, which is a K selected species, is much higher than an animal that is an R selected species that has a very high reproductive capacity. Because low reproductivity. Okay, where are you getting these terms from? What is alteration? Tell me. Okay, and what is precaution? Right. So you have two kinds of survival strategies, right? And this is seen in um, which kind of individuals? Birds. Yeah, that's correct, right? So broadly in birds you see altricial and precocial, and altricial and precocial are not seen very often in any other taxa. So maybe perhaps I guess in some mammals you might find altricial and precocial strategies, but not really. So it's mostly seen in birds, and strategies that make it more susceptible to extinction, I am not really sure if this would play a very strong role, because you have birds, which is the same group of animals, and one that might be altricial and that might be precocial, but I don't think any particular individual weighs higher than any other. Of course, yes, those that are born precocial, that can straight away fend for themselves, have a higher rate of survivability, but that is because of their life history strategies, right? So they don't have parental care, not just because the parents didn't want to care for them. It's it's a co-evolution that has happened, right? They don't have nests or anything where parental care plays an important role, right? And sometimes even if they are precocial, like in the case of ducks and geese, and even like chicken or other galliforms, they do follow their parents for a while till they learn how to, peck and eat their own food, etc. Because those are all learned behaviors to some extent. Okay, all right. So let's move on. So, in terms of impacts to habitat, there can be a number of different factors, right? Could you all give me examples of different forms of habitat degradation, fragmentation, loss, or displacement? Just one example each is fine. Can you give me an example of habitat degradation? Any example that you have heard of? Okay. Eutrophication in a lake. So, okay, yeah, deforestation, right? So all of this leads to degradation of a particular, well, deforestation is basically fits better in another category. Which category do you think that fits in, Nupur? Habitat loss, right? Yeah, that's correct. Fragmentation. Human habitat increase was in Manas National Park. Human habitat increase. So I'm assuming you are saying anthropogenic change has resulted in habitat getting fragmented, Afya? Okay. Cool. So yeah, so we've covered degradation, fragmentation, loss. What about displacement? What does displacement mean? Submergence of forest due to dams. Okay. Do you want to? Well, I think dams also result in fragmentation. But Rajshri, any examples? Upward migration due to climate change. Yeah, that's a good example. Sure. Yeah, but these movements are usually very slow movements, right? So this involves some degree of adaptation, right? But displacement is when there are, yeah, when suppose some area is going to be cleared and an entire bunch of animals are shifted from one area to another area, so they get displaced from their original habitat and then get put into another habitat. Okay, what happened, Rajeshri, in the flood? Oh, I see. Okay, so that is just habitat loss. Okay, okay, yeah. Okay, so I think we have covered all the kinds of habitat degradation, fragmentation, loss, and displacement. Alright, so which of the following areas does not support in situ conservation? Okay, one answer in. Okay, so yeah, I think everybody unanimously agrees that zoological parks and arboretums don't support in situ conservation. Does everybody know what an arboretum is? Yeah, anybody? Arboretum? What is an arboretum? Botanical garden. Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, great. So tell me, which of the species is an odd one out? Which of the species does not have an ex situ conservation plan in India? First of all, can you name the species that are present on the slide? Yes, they are all birds. I should have actually labeled them. But yeah, go ahead and tell me. Any idea? Picture 2 is of the Great Indian Bustard, correct. 4 is Indian vulture. 5 is Bengal florican. Okay, so yeah, 5 is Bengal florican. 4 is an Indian long-billed vulture, and 2 is Great Indian Bustard. That is correct. What about 1 and 3? Any idea? Okay, what does it even look like? Monal. Okay, yeah, it's not a monal. It's known as a Western tragopan, and it is a part of the pheasant family only. Okay, so you have the Western Tragopan, you have the Great Indian Bustard, you have the Lesser Florican, which is in uh, picture number 3, the Indian Longbill Vulture, picture number 4, and the Bengal Florican in picture number 5. So, any idea? So, uh, most of them have captive breeding programs in the country. Which of them does not have a captive breeding program yet? Any ideas? So most of these species that are mentioned out here are threatened, critically endangered, etc. They are hardly seen in the wild. Okay, so basically it is actually the Bengal florican, which is um, not having a captive breeding program, but the rest of them have captive breeding programs. So the Western Tragopan has a captive breeding program in Himachal. The Great Indian Bustard has a captive breeding program in several places. I think one is in Rajasthan. The Lesser Florican also has a captive breeding program, I think in Gujarat, if I'm not wrong. Gyps vulture, there is a famous one, um, which is, I'm blanking out on the name. There is some in the north, some in AP also. There is this vulture breeding center. There is one in UP. I'm forgetting the name of this one. Just look it up. In Pinjore in Haryana. Yeah. So the Bombay Natural History Society has a captive breeding program for vultures in Pinjore, in Haryana. They have one. They also have a captive breeding program for vultures in Bhopal and in Assam and in West Bengal, right? And the Bengal florican does not have a captive breeding program yet. All right. So, does anybody know what are the features of a captive breeding program? Why is it important? Any idea? Nobody? No ideas? What is a captive breeding program? Species which are near extinction. So, why can't these species be taken care of in a ex situ conservation program? why do you need to have an in situ conservation program, like a captive breeding program for these particular birds? Exactly. Why? What is the significance of this conservation breeding program or captive breeding program? Why is it necessary? Why can't they just have ex situ conservation programs? Okay, maybe we should discuss in situ and ex situ in general, and then let's get back to this. So my next question is, tell me first, what is an ex situ type of conservation and what are the advantages? What is ex situ conservation? What does it entail? The easiest way to tell this is to take an example. What is ex situ type of conservation? Afia, you're telling in situ or ex situ? Ex situ, right. So, ex situ is offsite by creating suitable conditions for breeding. Ex situ means outside natural habitat, correct. So now, why is ex situ conservation so important and what are the advantages of ex situ conservation? Now you can think of the captive breeding program and see what are the advantages of having, if remaining number of individuals is very low, correct, right? So if you have hardly any individuals left in the wild, like you can't just leave them. Even if you protect their entire habitat, it's unlikely that they are going to reproduce and propagate. If there is a threat in the natural habitat, yeah, correct. What else? Costly and it is a large area. Yeah, sure. What else? What else? Threat of disease and disaster may affect due to translocation. Okay, correct. Right. So, what is all this in point towards? All these factors that you have listed out, what do these point towards? What do all these point towards, all these factors that you have mentioned? Having, like, and take for example a captive breeding program. What do all these factors point towards? Right, you need special care to increase their numbers, right? So basically, what all this points towards is that special care and a controlled environment, right? Because they have to have certain climatic conditions and certain habitat, nutritional requirements, etc., that need to be so controlled such that they are able to reproduce and propagate in captivity. right? And this also provides full time permissible observations. There are no threats, as you all mentioned, to disease and other predators, etc. And even in the case of human intervention is required for fertilization, etc., this can be implemented in these captive breeding programs, right? But what could be the disadvantages of these captive breeding programs? They are quite costly, yes, and yeah, that's very important, right? So the problem with captive breeding programs and captive breeding programs that are done in a way where the human contact is a lot is such that what is the aim of a captive breeding program? So I'm just building on what Afia has mentioned. To increase the number of endangered species, to increase the natality of offspring, sure. And then do what? After the increase in number, what is the purpose of it? Is the purpose of it to correct, right? They need to be released into their natural habitat, reintroduction, right? So that's the whole point of having these captive breeding programs is first to recover the recover the species that has been present in low numbers, ensure that they reproduce to a successful population size, and then reintroduce them to the wild, right? And the reintroduction part is where things get tricky because, as Afia mentioned earlier, since they are in constant human contact, they have forgotten how to survive in the wild, right? They don't know how to fend for themselves, they don't know how to catch their own food, they don't know how to defend themselves from predators. So utmost care must be taken in captive breeding programs to ensure that whichever organism is being dealt with has minimal human contact, such that they do not get habituated to having humans around them all the time. Otherwise, if they are released in the wild, they are likely to come back to humans, where they will probably again be hunted, and yeah, their numbers are going to drop. So wild behavior is a very important part. All right. So moving on to the next question: in which approach do we protect and conserve animals that need urgent measures to save it from extinction? Do you have in situ conservation, on-site conservation, ex situ conservation, or no conservation? Okay, So two of you say it is ex situ conservation, one of you say it is in situ conservation. So it is indeed ex situ conservation, which is the correct answer. And urgent conservation measures cannot be implemented in an in situ framework because of the factors that we just described earlier. Alright, so long-term preservation strategy for the conservation of a critically endangered species would involve botanical gardens, cryopreservation, zoological parks, or wildlife safari parks. Okay, excellent. So I guess all of you have gotten the point of what is cryopreservation. So yes, they do maintain a germ bank and see where a germline of sperm and eggs or even plant genetic matter can be stored in these gene banks, right? All right. So now can you tell me how many of you have heard of the sloss debate, and where does this get implemented in conservation planning? So can someone tell me what is actually this sloss debate? Anything that you know about the sloss debate? Anybody? Have you heard of the sloss debate before? Right. So what does this basically elaborate on? What is this talking about in this single large or several small? Single large is more conducive for conservation, right? So we're talking about habitat. Yeah, so when we talk about large and small, we're talking about habitat fragment size, right? So when people are thinking of conservation planning and they're thinking of having what habitat what type of habitats to conserve, should they conserve one large mass of habitat or should it be multiple small fragments of habitat? And there have been several instances of people going back and forth, and it's usually preferred that a single large unfragmented habitat is better for the conservation of species. So this is a figure that came out in this journal called in this is an ecology related concept, and here they have drawn out parallels for the single large versus several small fragment sizes, right? So if you have a large fragment size, larger reserves are better than smaller reserve. In terms of number of reserve, one large reserve is better than several smaller reserve. It also helps in management and is much easier. So now, how close should reserves be from each other? Should they be far away from each other or should they be close to each other? In this case, closer proximity helps, because if there are species that move between these areas, it's probably easier if these suitable habitat fragments are closer to each other, right? When you have connectivity versus non-connectivity, definitely connectivity is the one that is preferred. When we're looking at size, it is shapes. A circular shape is better than an oval or oblong shape, because the boundaries are minimized in a circular shape. And should they have a buffer zone or not, it should definitely be a particular space that has a buffer zone, right? Okay, so now I'm going to show you a little bit of interesting concept, but it's probably not been described to you in the lecture so far. So this is something known as the extinction vortex. So I want you all to stare at the screen for 2 minutes and just have a look at whatever is written out here. So we will not go into much detail, but I want to just give you a general gist of what exactly is this extinction vortex. So earlier in the session, I was just chatting with Afia regarding genetics and the genomic part that is essential for conservation. So conservation genetics is a whole new field. Not new field, is a whole important field in the conservation of any organism. And why is it so important? Why do we need to know the genetic makeup of any species that we are trying to conserve? One second, sorry. Right, so sorry about that. So right, so what is important for conservation genetics is what is really important in conservation genetics, and why is it important to know the genetic makeup of organisms. Inbreeding can happen ex situ, right? Also, need whether a species can sustain the conservation sites environment or not, right? So it's very important to know the genetic makeup of any species that needs to be conserved, because um, we don't want species, so genetic diversity is very important in sustaining stable populations, right? So yeah, so Rajeshri, okay, so okay, let's just hang on. So let's go to this figure and let me bring up a pointer. So here you have demographic stochasticity and environmental stochasticity. What does all this? What does this mean? Any idea? Demographic stochasticity and environmental stochasticity. Randomness, right? So it basically means any chance event where the number of individuals, which is demographic, gets fluctuated, or any environmental catastrophe happens, that might lead to fragmentation and isolated populations, right? So if we go on to the next section out here, this leads to small fragmented and isolated populations. So there are a number of anthropogenic drivers which are basically human induced, that involve climate change, land sea use change, direct exploitation, invasive alien species, and pollution, that might lead to uh, these stochastic events. So basically the extinction vortex describes a scenario where environmental, genetic, and demographic forces interact through time to drive a population towards extinction, right? And because these biotic and abiotic factors have an amplifying effect, there is like a feedback loop, and it's called a vortex because it all your organisms get sucked into this vortex and they are unable to get out of it, right? So once they fall into this theoretical concept of an extinction vortex, there is no way out, right? And it leads to ultimately leads to biodiversity loss and extinction. So moving back to our figure, such random effects lead to fragmented populations. And what happens when populations are fragmented? You have a decrease in population size, and their distribution also decreases. Now this decrease in population size leads to genetic randomness or genetic stochasticity. So Rajeshri just mentioned something as genetic drift out here. Rajeshri, would you like to explain what is genetic drift? And anybody else, inbreeding and genetic loss of genetic diversity? So it says increase in drift, increase in inbreeding, and loss in genetic diversity. Any idea what could genetic drift be? Variation in different genotypes in a small population leads to okay, so inbreeding is correct, that is within related individuals, that reduces genetic variability. So actually what is drift? So is how can if so basically if there is variation in genetic makeup, which means genetic diversity, there will not be any extinction, right? Because there will be high degree of genetic variability. But if the population size is small, uh, well, talking about reproductively viable individuals, they can reproduce, and depending on the number of offspring they produce, they can still survive at low number of individuals. But the point is that in genetic drift, what happens is that the effective genetic variation decreases. That is because if you have a pool of like 100 individuals to start with, and this undergoes a, let's say, a catastrophic event where 95 of the individuals die and only 5% of the 5 individuals remain. These 5 individuals have a much lesser proportion of genetic makeup as compared to the entire original bunch of 100 individuals, right? And when these start, if they are reproductively viable, etc., they start breeding, they start inbreeding, and that results in loss of genetic diversity, because inbreeding can lead to accumulation of deleterious genes, which will ultimately lead to loss of the entire species, right? So you have increase in drift, increase in inbreeding, and decrease in genetic diversity. Now this ultimately leads to lower adaptability. They are not able to adapt to their environment, which in turn leads to low survival and reproduction. They don't survive for long, and then that leads to slower population growth rate, right? So their populations are not at all increasing. And this, when again subjected to demographic and environmental stochasticity, it leads to a downward spiral loop, right? So I hope in an overall picture, this extinction vortex is clear. So drift is common to all species, that is critically endangered. Yeah, so it is termed as something known as a genetic bottleneck, and any species that is found in very less number has a much lower viability of genetic variance. So the genetic variability is much lesser. But the evaluation of critically endangered is based on some IUCN criteria. So, but definitely if the population size is less, if they have gone from a large population size and contracted to a very small population size, it does entail that their genetic variability has decreased. Okay, so another great example that all of you must be familiar with. I think all of you have heard about the news which has been going on for now over 1 year. We have been talking about cheetahs in India, and can someone tell me anything about this particular project? So what actually happened? As the title says, after 75 years, cheetahs returned to India in a grand experiment. What happened here? Where was this? And what really happened? You can put in your thoughts in the chat. Right. There were cheetahs taken from Africa, and where are they right now in India? Housed. Kuno. Where is Kuno National Park? Cheetahs are adapting to it. Are they really adapting? I'm not sure. But yeah. So can we call this as a reintroduction? Right, it's an MP. That's correct. Can we call this as reintroduction of cheetahs in India? Right. So the cheetahs that were present in India in the past were what cheetahs? Were they the same cheetahs? Were they the same species? No idea. Okay. Afia, any thoughts on this? Different species. Yes, that's correct, right? So, uh, in India, cheetahs have been extinct since the 1950s due to hunting pressures, and there are two types of cheetahs that are present in the world. One is the Asiatic cheetah, which is Echinonyx jubatus, Venashicus, and the other one is the African cheetah, which is a different subspecies, right? So there are only lesser than 50 individuals of Asiatic cheetah which roamed around the Indian subcontinent that are left in the wild, and this is present only in Iran. Only in Iran. And the African cheetahs are found distributed over the African subcontinent in various pockets. So this is the first intercontinental global translocation. It can't be classified as a reintroduction, it is a translocation where another species has been brought into the country, right? And well, I think there are like several parameters that can be the discussion can be never ending on various factors that why the cheetah introduction was done, etc. But can someone talk about? Can you tell me about like the habitat? Is the habitat the same of cheetahs that have been translocated from Africa to India? No, right? It's not the same. What are the differences? What are the main differences? The environment, right? What in the environment is different? Temperature, correct. All the abiotic factors are different. You have different prey species, right? So the cheetah, whatever the cheetah hunts in Africa is not the cheetah that is not what the cheetah hunts in India. And I'm not sure how they train cheetahs to hunt in Africa before they do any form of translocation, but yeah. So there are a number of factors. Of course, there have been a lot of. This has been a huge project that has been entailed by several people of the government and uh, wildlife, the research biological side in India to facilitate the cheetah introduction, cheetah translocation in India. So if we cover the range where the cheetah is actually found, is that it is found in covering this very large area. So you have extent where basically it's a resident, which is these orange areas that are shown out here. Then you have passage, which is basically where they pass through, which are these light shaded areas in the center. Then you have possibly extinct, which is these hashed out areas, and completely extinct in the red areas. So if you see that the distribution of this particular species has drastically reduced over the entire original distribution range, right? And now it's restricted only to these orange pockets. And here you have the Asiatic cheetah, which is found in this tiny pocket in Iran. Right. So this should give you an idea of cheetah distribution. So basically this brings us to an end of today's session, but I wanted to share with you, I thought there would be more people, but yeah, nevertheless. So if you are interested in, if you have completed a master's or are from an engineering background, you are eligible to take this graduate aptitude test in engineering in the field of ecology and evolution, and this is basically a standardized test that if you clear this, it enables you to apply to ecology and evolutionary programs in any of the ICERs, JNCSAR, any of the IITs and ISC in Bangalore. So the deadline to register for this exam is on the 29th of September. And if you are interested in this field, this might be a good thing to take this GATE exam. There is a bunch of resources that are highlighted out here. And there are also a lot of career options in the field of ecology. I most often get asked as to what next after you complete a course in ecology, or you complete a degree in ecology. So there are 4 main sectors. So this is actually a game, but just to summarize it using the thing highlighted out here, you can either be in academia, you can have a government job, you can work for any private sector, for any CSIR, etc. Or you can work for non-profit such as an NGO that also might do independent research. And the 8 probable positions that you can occupy are: you can either be a technician, you can be a science communicator that talks about science in popular science formats, you can be an editor or a publisher, you can be a manager, data scientist, that's another thing that is catching up really fast. You can also get into policy, you can coordinate various activities, etc. And also importantly, you can be an educator. So I hope the field of ecology does and can open doors to several different opportunities. And based on Afia's request, I actually have a couple of slides just to explain the Jacquard's index. So basically, when you're talking about community ecology and you're trying to calculate similarity and dissimilarity between 2 populations, you can use a similarity index or a dissimilarity index, and the Jacquard's index is basically a similarity index. So the Jacquard similarity index divides the number of species shared by both samples, which is basically, let's say, 2 populations, by the sum of all the species occurring in both the populations together, right? So basically you have A as a number of species occurring in population 1 and population 2, and then you have B and C that are present in population 2 independently and C in population 1 independently, right? Oh, I think I have a figure, 1 second. So it's basically like this, right? So if you look at the Venn diagram, in the place of sample 1 and sample 2, you think of site 1 and site 2. Species shared between site 1 and site 2 is termed as A, and species that are unique to site 1 is C and site 2 is B. So to calculate the Jacquard's index, you have A intersection B divided by A union B. So what would this formula look like? Any idea if I were to represent it in terms of A, B, C? Any idea? You can just look at the Venn diagram formula and tell me. So what is A intersection B out here? What is it represented by? and A is, it might be confusing here. Okay, let's say site 1 and site 2. So site 1 intersection site 2, or sample 1 intersection sample 2 is A, right? And what is sample 1 union sample 2? A plus B plus C, right? So when you divide A divided by A plus B plus C, you will get the similarity between both the sides. This is a very basic and crude index. So this does not take into account several other factors, but in its purest and simplest form, this is what the concept behind the Jacquard's index is. Does this make sense, Afia? A will be the number of individuals common in both sites, right? The species, yeah. Yeah, correct. Species, correct. So if I have 5 species in A, 5 species in sample 1 and 6 species in sample 2, and 3 of them are shared, then I will have that on my numerator divided by the total number of species present in both. Yeah, cool. Alright, then I think we are done for the day. We can meet next week for discussion for week 9. Alright, bye Rajeshri and Afia. Thanks for joining in today.